Now that we have our TM Twitter class set up, it's time to add the code to check if the user has supplied credentials. And if so, use the Twitter API to see if those credentials are authorized. There are a few things that we need to do to get this working. This will require us to add methods to the TM Twitter class, add a connection to the TM Twitter class to the main controller, as well as add a new class that will execute the curl command to communicate with the Twitter API. Once we have all of that working, we will also introduce NSXML This is the class we will use to parse the XML returned by the Twitter API. We have a lot of work to do here, so let's get started. Okay, so go to the interface file of TM Twitter class, and the first method we'll implement is hasCredentials. This method will return a Boolean value of yes if the user has supplied both a username and a password, and no otherwise. We'll start off by creating the method declaration in the interface file, and then write the method in the implementation file. So here we'll declare it. It's going to be an instance method. It's going to return a Boolean value, and we're going to call it hasCredentials. That's all we need here. I'll save it. Now copy it. Go to the implementation file, and I'm going to put this below the dealloc method. I'll paste that in. This method will only have one line in it, and it's going to be return. And then we're going to use the ternary operator. So we'll have a test. We'll say if nil equals, and here we're going to access our instance variables using dot notation. So we'll say self.username, and then we're going to put two vertical pipes, and that's on the same key as the backslash, just below the delete key on a regular size keyboard, and that is the symbol for logical OR. So the other thing we want to check is if nil is equal to self_user_pass. We're going to close our paren, and that is our ternary test. So we're first checking to see if nil is equal to self.username or if nil is equal to self.user_pass. So this will check if either one of those are empty. And if either one is empty, we're going to return no. And that means the user has not provided both the username and the password. But if they have, we're going to return yes. That's all there is to hasCredentials. Notice in this example that I put nil first when checking if the username and password were nil. This is a handy way to avoid making a simple assignment instead of checking for equality. In this format, we get a compiler warning if we forget the second equal sign. On the other hand, if we set self.username equals nil and we forget the additional equal sign, then we have actually set the value of username to nil instead of checking for equality against nil. And the compiler can't warn us because it doesn't know we made a mistake. And a quick note on dot notation. It may not be apparent that writing self.username is not setting the variable username directly. It is actually using the setter method that is being generated by the synthesize directive. This is an important distinction to make because if we leave off the self dot, then you would be setting the value of the variable directly. Probably not what you want to do. Okay, with that out of the way, we are now ready to head back over to the TM main controller class and add some code that will allow us to start using this class. At the top of the TM main controller implementation file, we need to add two things. The first is an import statement for the TM Twitter header file. This is how the main controller class will know about the TM Twitter class's instance variables and methods. And the way we add that is we add a pound import. And we use quotes because this file is within our application. And you can see we get autocomplete. I use the control / to go to the end of that line. And I end it with quotes. The second thing we need to add is a way to get a pointer to the instance of the Twitter singleton class. There are several ways to do this, but in this example, we will use the #define preprocessor directive. We will use the define directive to create a macro that initializes the TM Twitter class. I think this is pretty cool, It can help you make your code easier to read and allow you to write less code as well. You use the define directive to create macro definitions. The word identifier that is after the define keyword is the macro name. That is the name that you will use in your code. The value that is the replacement is what is substituted for the identifier. Here are some examples to make this more clear. In the first one, we have define max size is 200. In our second one, we say define size error, and then we give it an Objective-C string. Maximum size for that item is 200. So to use those in code, we say if item size is greater than max size. If that statement's true, then in our code, we could say self set error text, so that would be a method that's inside of our own class, and we could just give it the size error macro instead of writing that text out each time. So what this is doing, it's taking max size and it's replacing that with 200. So in our code, when it was actually ran, that statement would say if item size is greater than 200. It wouldn't actually have the variable there, it would substitute it with the value that we've created in our define statement. And the same goes for size error. You can also use the #define directive to create function-like macros. And this is where the fun really begins. Here are a few examples. Now we used the last two in this project, so you will get a chance to see them in action. In the first example, the macro being created is max value. It requires two parameters, and in this case they are integers. The replacement value for the macro is a ternary operator, which returns the greater of the two values. Used in code, this would look like any other normal C function. The second example comes in very handy. Here we create a macro that instantiates an NSUserDefaults object and stores it in the userDefaults macro. Now, anytime we want to use the userDefaults database, we can send messages to userDefaults.